Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Welcome to Three Martini Lunch on a Monday. I am not Greg, as you are used to having. My name is Craig, filling in for Greg. I think every time I do this, Jim, we make it easy on you. You just got to change that one letter a little bit.
And if people listen carefully, they can tell it's almost indistinguishable with my accent. So.
Perfect. But we are here to talk about the good, the bad, and the insane, or the crazy once again. We can start with the good, and this is uniquely good, I think. And I love the way that you referred to it when you sent over this topic to me. You said that sometimes Trump's public tantrums work out. This might be one of those cases involving trade with Canada. What do we got here?
Yeah, look, and listeners to this podcast know that I am not usually a big fan of Trump jumping onto Truth Social and you know, raging and fuming and venting his spleen. But it seems to have worked out this case. As people know, we're basically in a trade war with a big chunk of the world. Canada was one of the first targets of it. And while there's a whole bunch of cases where economists will make criticisms of this approach, Canada does have some policies that seem genuinely unfair to the U.S., and probably the most notable one is the digital services tax. It has long drawn criticism from U.S. officials across the political spectrum. The Biden administration objected to it and said this is violating the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, arguing that the tax is discriminating against U.S. companies. And a trade group representing Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Google, basically, you know, Silicon Valley, called on the U.S. Trade Representative to open an investigation into Canadian taxes, estimating they will collectively cost U.S. firms between $900 million and $2.3 billion annually. Also, the first payments were expected to be even higher. Companies will be charged retroactively on taxes on revenue dating back to 2022. Well, the President of the United States did not like that. He just basically said, we are breaking off negotiations. We're not going to even sit down. We're walking away from the table. You guys are ridiculous. And Trump called it, quote, a direct and blatant attack on our country, and called Canada a difficult partner. I am going to stop all negotiations with Canada right now until they straighten out their act. That was on Friday. Well, guess what happens this morning? Actually, I'm sorry, yesterday. The Canadian government announced that they will rescind the digital services tax in anticipation of a mutually beneficial comprehensive trade agreement with the United States. Consistent with this action, Prime Minister Carney and President Trump have agreed that parties will resume negotiations with a view towards agreeing on a deal by July 21st, 2025. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, doesn't it? Correct.
Well, I wonder a little bit, though, Jim, and I'm very curious about this. Is it the squeaky wheel, or is it the fact that they actually believe that he would literally cut off all ties if they don't do what he wants? Like, it's not just the threat. It's that action could follow the threat, right?
Yeah, and you know, listeners probably recall that earlier in the year, Wall Street traders were starting to make trades based on the assumption that none of the trade war was going to get that bad under the acronym TACO, Trump always chickens out. I think if you want a second opinion on whether Trump always chickens out, consult the Iranian nuclear program right now. Mm-hmm. He doesn't always drop out, chicken out. He doesn't always back down. Sometimes he really, and I think it's safe to say after the Iran, and he seemed like in a terrific mood at the NATO summit last week, Trump's really feeling his oats right now. And this is probably not a good time to test him. He's probably more likely to go the extra mile and to follow through on any implied threats. And this is not, this is not the time to play a game of chicken with President Trump.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't want to test President Trump now or literally any time in the near future. It feels like he's at that point in his presidency where he's going after everyone.
It would be bad for business.
Yeah.
And speaking of business,
personal business.
If you're running a business, you know that every time you miss a call, you're leaving money on the table. When every customer conversation matters, you need a phone system that keeps up and helps you stay connected. And that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that streamlines and scales your customer communications. It works through an app on your phone or computer, so there's no more carrying 2 phones or using a landline. With OpenPhone, your team can share one number and collaborate on customer calls and texts like a shared inbox. That way, any teammate can pick up right where the last person left off, keeping response times faster than ever. OpenPhone is offering our listeners 20% off their first 6 months at openphone.com/3ML. That is OPENPHONE.com/3ML. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone. No missed calls, no missed customers.
All right, so we move on to the bad, which actually uniquely is someone that recently tested President Trump, and it didn't work out well for him. This would be a senator out of North Carolina, Thom Tillis. He and another senator have announced that they are, or a representative have announced they're not going to be running for reelection. You say this is very good news for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, look, Tillis, neither one of them is a huge shock. Both of them were ones that have had increasing friction with President Trump in the half year or so of his second term. Tillis is up for re-election, was going to be up for re-election next year. North Carolina is one of those states that it's red, but if you look back, Republicans win statewide, usually by a surprisingly close margin. Trump won by about 1% back in 2016, I believe, narrowly won in 2020, did a little better in 2024. But it's not South Carolina. It's not any of these other southern states that people think of as being very. And obviously, there's possibility that Governor Roy Cooper might end up running, which would increase the odds for Democrats in that state as is. Tillis was very upset about what he's characterizing as Medicaid cuts in the big beautiful bill. I would point out that really a lot of this is like checking for fraud, checking for eligibility. Really basic. I don't see them as draconian axe-wielding cuts, but Tillis seemed to be particularly worried about it. Trump, in one of the negative sides of him jumping onto Truth Social and venting his spleen, took it out on Tillis. And also Don Bacon. People think of Nebraska as being this deep red state. Yeah, but the congressional district around Omaha is not particularly conservative. Generally, it's kind of a moderate Republican style one, and Don Bacon was the kind of guy who fit that very well. At one point, there was a Democrat representing that seat just a couple of years ago, if I remember correctly. Don Bacon also announced, that's it, I'm out of here. This doesn't doom Republican chances of holding the Congress, but it's one House seat. It's probably going to be pretty expensive, Omaha, TV market. And then North Carolina, this was going to be a challenging race as is. It's probably going to be even more challenging with an open seat race.
It's interesting. I'm having conversations with people here locally in Houston, Texas, where I live, trying to win over some deeply Democratic positions in Congress with Republican candidates, and they have to find a way to be in the middle. The thing that a lot of people forget about Tillis and Bacon and how they get elected in the first place is they had to appeal to their specific constituents who want to vote someone into office with those types of sensibilities. And so the moment that, as you're saying, you lose these seats, the most likely person to be a true threat to win them is someone on the other side who's going to come off as more of a centrist if you're going to go further to the right into the Republican Party or into the, MAGA Trump portions of it, correct?
Yeah, and look, it's conceivable that there'll be a strong candidate who emerges from what's now going to be an open seat Republican primary. Hopefully not Mark Robinson. Look, how many people can appeal to the... Actually, I won't even go with the jokes of Mark Robinson. Listeners, insert your Mark Robinson joke here.
There we go. I love that.
You could find another moderate Republican, but these are just, the Omaha and the state of North Carolina are not necessarily places where you're going to be straight up MAGA. And apparently already this morning, there's a report that Lara Trump, who apparently in January was being considered for an appointment to the Senate seat in Florida. I guess she owns multiple properties. I could possibly run in there. Now, if the progressive left is wants to vote against Trump, if you put Trump's name literally on the ballot in his daughter-in-law, you're going to make things a little bit easier for Democratic motivation there. So
I do think we need to find Lara Trump a job just so that she doesn't keep being the main Senate choice everywhere. Someone hire her to do something else, and then maybe she won't pop up all the time.
Craig, has anybody figured out is there a tracker on Kari Lake? Does anyone know where she is? Because she's another one who'd be likely to.
Why don't they run together? We should have that be a joint ticket.
For somewhere far away. Guam.
Yeah. Guam. There you go.
Diego Garcia. They need some representatives.
There you go. That'd be perfect.
Is American foreign policy a mystery to you? It's often treated as an untouchable topic that is only understood by an enlightened few. This view is dangerous because it encourages citizens to ignore a critical aspect of American political life that is our duty to understand. This is why we at the 3 Martini Lunch encourage you to sign up for Hillsdale's free online course, American Foreign Policy, and learn how America should make decisions with a view towards securing equal natural rights of American citizens, as well as analyzing and understanding matters of war and peace that affect all of us. In this 9-lecture American Foreign Policy course, you'll learn about the principles that guided the foreign policy of the American founders, the importance of the Monroe Doctrine in shaping our early years, progressive understanding of foreign policy from the Spanish-American War through World War II, the formations of America's Cold War foreign policy and the growth of America's military and intelligence bureaucracy, and the aims of the global war on terrorism, and how today's foreign policy departs from our understanding of the founders. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll in this course, American Foreign Policy. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. Once again, that's hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll for free.
All right, now we move on to the absolutely crazy, which I do love as part of this discussion in 3 Martini Lunch. This one is unsurprising, I guess, to some, because the numbers just continue to trend down. But more U.S. adults than ever are not proud to be part of this country. How do we talk about this one?
Well, I was going to say, this comes from Gallup, saying a record low 58% of U.S. adults say that they're either extremely or very proud to be an American. 41% said extremely, 17% said very. That is down 9 percentage points from last year and 5 points below the prior low from 2020. And let's face it, 2020 was a pretty dark time. I could understand if you're feeling a little down. You can't leave your house, and certain mayors are eating at the French Laundry, and then they're tasering you if you try to step out, all that kind of stuff. So the 41% who are extremely proud is not statistically different from the prior lows of 38% in 2022, 39% in 2023. Now, the other thing, which is, if you're saying, wow, it dropped, as a significant drop from last year, what changed from last year? Well, if you suspect that this is a partisan phenomenon, Gallup writes that Democrats are mostly responsible for the drop in U.S. pride this year, with 36% saying they're extremely or very proud, down from 62% a year ago. This is only the second time Democrats' pride fallen below the majority level, with a 42% reading in 2020. I'm just looking back and thinking, maybe Democrats felt a lot more proud of America when Joe Biden was in the Oval Office. And, now look,
that's interesting.
Yeah, look, your country is the greatness of your country should be minimally affected by who's in the Oval Office at any given moment. Right? Yes. The country is more than its government. The country is more than the president. We are a big country. We have 300 million people or so. 330, I think we're up to a million. We're great. We're innovative. We're smart. We're determined. We're charitable by almost every measure. I'm not saying America's perfect. I think it's perfectly reasonable to be frustrated with your country at times. Perfectly reasonable to be disappointed in it. Maybe even mad at it. But first of all, where the door is. If you want to live somewhere else, you can I don't want to say necessarily love it or leave it, but maybe appreciate it or leave it. But what do you make of this, Craig?
Well, no, I think it's very interesting. You said where the door is, because the country itself doesn't profoundly change based on who's in the office of president. That's what you're saying. The basic tenets of our country remain the same. Yes, there are things that change. Yes, there are policies that change, but I still have certain freedoms that exist within the United States that don't exist other places. I should be proud of that. The thing I thought was most interesting is that young people are also a driving factor in this. And young people are not proud of their country in general. 47% between 16 and 20, 41% now would say they're proud to be Americans if they're in the Gen Z. That is a bigger drop than any other generation as far as, going the wrong way. And I wonder what that is. I wonder if it's a much more personal, I'm not succeeding, I don't like my country because of that, than anything else.
I strongly suspect that's a factor. I also kind of wonder how much it comes from TikTok. But hey, remember when we banned that? Remember it was banned by Congress, signed into law by the president, upheld by the Supreme Court as not violating the First Amendment, and then we just decided not to do it because the president doesn't feel like it.
That's true.
Actually, now I'm starting to see why people feel not quite as proud of their country as they used to be. No, actually, people have, besides, I don't need to rehash the degree to which TikTok is basically a Chinese propaganda tool. And that's why, every couple of months, young people are like, hey, did you know Osama bin Laden had a lot of legitimate points? And you want to grab these kids and shake them.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of the enthusiasm for Hamas was spread by what I would characterize as propaganda being spent through TikTok. So having a significant chunk of America's young people with their eyes glued to a Chinese propaganda tool, many hours a day, probably has some negative effects. And I just wish the president could do something about it. I just wish there was something Trump could do.
Yeah, I guess. But, hey, we could try to ban it.
Yeah, I started out positive on Trump.
Yeah,
It wouldn't take too long.
This is crazy. And I do love the way you said that, too, that, having your eyes glued to a Chinese propaganda tool is probably bad if we're just talking about it in that sense. Yeah. It's probably not going well for us. Well, cool. Thank you as always, Jim. This has been a Monday. I look forward to doing this again with you.
See you tomorrow, Craig.
See you, buddy.
You've been listening to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast, available on all fine platforms everywhere. If you really like us, think about leaving a review. 5 stars. 4 stars? Maybe. If it's 3 stars or less, keep your opinion to yourself.
Have a terrific Monday and join us again Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.